Welcome to Powered by Snowflake, a series where I interview technology leaders building applications and businesses on Snowflake. I'm your host, Daniel Myers, and today I'm talking with Dan LeBlanc, CEO and co-founder of Daasity. Daasity is an ELT platform for consumer brands powered by Snowflake. Dan, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Daniel. Thanks a lot for having us here.
Yeah, it's great to have you in the studio. So I want to learn more about your background. How did you create and build this business? And tell me in your own words, what is Daasity?
Well, first I'll start with what is Daasity. We are a ELT plus, and I'll kind of get into the plus platform, really driven for consumer brands using Snowflake. And the ELT plus is really this concept of if you want to become a business that's data-driven, a consumer brand, you need to extract your data, you need to transform it, you need to also visualize it, and then what we like to say is operationalize, which is how do you make sense of that data? And a lot of that is pushing that data back into different platforms. And so that's Daasity, ELT plus.
I love it. I love that you mentioned operationalizing your data. That's one of the terms that Snowflake, we also love talking about how to operationalize data, because operationalizing data is really where a lot of the value is gained from the data, is how you're able to actually utilize it and operationalize it. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we're super excited about what we've got, and what's really, I think, really powerful for us is how we've used Snowflake to build our platform from both enterprise. So we work with merchants that are in the billions of dollars of annual sales, where they get to choose from our, what we also like to call modular platform, whether they want that extract, load, transform, visualize, operationalize. But then for smaller merchants, all powered by Snowflake, we have a pre-packaged solution that basically makes it easy for somebody who's not very technical to get all of those components in a single solution where they don't have to go anywhere else. And so it gives them that great place to become data-driven all in one place. That's
pretty cool. Tell me about kind of the history of Daasity. How long has it been around, and how are you growing today?
So we were founded in actually mid-2017, but really didn't launch our product till 2019. And the concept of Daasity really came from my background and our co-founder. So we used to work together at ProFlowers. So if any of you have ever sent flowers to your mom, your wife, and they didn't live at home, or maybe their office, you may have used them. Well, that company got bought by FTD in 2014, and I was running all of consumer analytics. And we had a number of colleagues that went to brands like Rothy's here in San Francisco and Movement Watches in LA, and all these kind of cool brands back in 2014, 15 that were on this thing called Shopify that nobody had ever heard of back then. And the analytics were terrible. And so they came to me and said, can you build us a data stack? Help us build this analytics data stack to become data-driven like we were at ProFlowers. And that's how Daasity came about. So we launched in 2019 with 12 brands. We now power over 1,600 brands across the globe. So it's not only in North America, we've got brands in Australia, New Zealand, and the EU and UK. So really excited about everything that we've done and really helped in partnership with Snowflake.
That is pretty exciting to see that level of growth. So tell me more about this data stack that you've built, and how does Snowflake fit into your overall architecture?
It's a core component. So on our enterprise side, there's a lot of pieces around Snowflake that are really exciting for us. So as we think about a place where we go load all of this data for customers, whether it's through the direct and all the connections that it has, whether it's data sharing, there's a lot of functionality within Snowflake that makes our lives easier and also makes it great for the merchant. So it's a platform that's very SQL driven, and so it allows us to essentially kind of scale warehouses up and down as we're wanting to do things quicker or slower. It allows us to share from other other vendors. So there are some vendors that allow us to essentially get that data instead of having to extract it through APIs. We just connect to us, and then we've suddenly joined it together, and so that makes that very powerful. For our smaller merchants, they don't even realize that they're using Snowflake, but it's so important for us because it's made a lot of how we provision and maintain these platforms really, really easy. When we were first kind of looking at other solutions and sort of looking at Snowflake, one of the things that was important for us is every merchant or brand, their data needs to be siloed. And that's a very difficult problem to solve, and basically, creating these individual databases for each merchant. Well, that's actually really easy in Snowflake. And so that was really valuable for us.
That's pretty cool to hear. So from here, I want to shift gears a little bit and see a demo of what all the things that you are describing about.
Great. I will jump in and we'll do that. So let's start with Daasity's modular data platform. So when we think about our platform, it's really about 6 things, 5 which I've shown here that are really important. First is extract. How do you extract data from all these other different data sources that you have? And especially for commerce brands that are omni-channel, things like maybe your Shopify, your BigCommerce, but then if you're going to be an omni-channel brand, you're probably selling on Amazon, and you might have your own stores, or maybe you're selling to like a Target or a Walmart. And so that becomes really important. So we extract that data, and then of course we load it into Snowflake. Really, really important for us to do, and love how we can scale up and scale down in terms of the warehouse size to be able to make that loading faster or smaller. And then we transform. And this is one of the unique parts of Daasity is we have all of this logic for a merchant to be able to essentially transform that data, because things are very similar. It doesn't matter whether you're $1 million or $1 billion. You're still trying to calculate lifetime value, and you're trying to calculate lifetime value by what channel did you come in. And so we pre-built all of this code that people can utilize if they want, or they can go use it or build their own. And that's the transform piece. We have pre-built dashboards for Looker and Tableau. And then we allow the merchant to operationalize, as you were saying, like, how do you make use of this? It's not just about reporting, but it's about things like building segments, getting insights, and be able to push them back into platforms like TikTok and Klaviyo, and be able to trigger emails and have events or build audiences. And that's really the modular data platform. But the last piece that I talked about was that orchestration, how we help a brand and a customer essentially make sure that all of those pieces go in the right sequence. Because it would be terrible to go and push data before you've actually loaded it and run the transform. And if you don't do that all in one single platform, the risk of those steps running out of sequence is really high. So how does one get started with Daasity? Well, the first thing is going to be entering your Snowflake credentials. And you'll see that this is a really simple interface that we have for actually going and implementing and setting up your Snowflake. You just enter your Snowflake instance, some additional information, and this makes it very simple. We're automatically, at this point, going to create several warehouses. One that's around loading, one that's around transforming, creating different roles within the platform. And so it makes it very simple, so you don't have to go copy a bunch of scripts and run them. So if you're kind of a non-technical user, it makes it very easy to set up and use Daasity. But if you're a very technical user, it gives you a lot of power to kind of manage this by yourself.
I love that.
So once you've done the warehouse, you've set up your warehouse, next step is we're going to be in the Daasity UI. First thing is I need to add integrations. And so here we are in our demo environment. I've got a Shopify and a Google Analytics, and we'll kind of come back to that. But I just click on the new integration, and I can choose from a whole variety of different platforms. And you'll see what makes us truly unique is really this focus on commerce and omni-channel. So we support platforms like Shopify and Salesforce Commerce Cloud and Magento. So these probably the most prominent platforms within the .com space, right, that are powering your .com. Amazon's the biggest online marketplace. So if you don't have your Amazon Seller Central data, what are you doing? And then for those platforms, and then for those companies that are running their own POS, or maybe through things like Target.com or Walmart.com, we have those connections to those platforms, but we also support a bunch of POS systems like Lightspeed, KWI. And then you've got ad platforms and email and SMS. So we really are trying to make Snowflake and Daasity basically the center, the operating system of your brand from an analytics perspective. This is just the tip though. This is just the part, this is just the extraction and just what is a little bit of what makes Daasity so cool. So I've got all this data, but it's all sitting in different silos. And that's where workflows become so important for us and really what makes Daasity so incredible. So you'll notice at the top here, we've got this GitHub connection. And you're gonna notice that there's a repository URL and a Daasity shared URL. So we give you a repository, a GitHub repo, where you're gonna be able to go add your own SQL code and essentially everything that you want to run in your Snowflake instance. You go add the code and it's gonna be able to go schedule it as part of our orchestration. We're also giving you access to thousands of lines of code around pre-built data models that you can use or not use. But things like how do you combine Google Analytics 4, develop attribution models based upon Google Analytics 4, link it to your .com so you can go calculate, say, return on ad spend, cost per order, cost per acquisition across not only a last click, but maybe a last ad click or a last marketing click or a first click. And so these pre-built data models give you really the opportunity to accelerate the development of your analytics, because really the important part is it's not about building the pipelines. It's about what are the insights I'm getting and how am I operationalizing that data and pushing it back and making smarter decisions. And so this is what this GitHub connection does. Now, you've written code. What do you do now? The first part is let's go into this daily workflow. So I can come in here and I can edit it. And what you'll see is I've got my demo. And the first step is it's going to run the extraction. So it's going to run these extractions, replicating data from these sources. And then I'm saying, oh, I want to refresh currency. But what if you happen to sell in multiple countries? You probably want to convert things into maybe US dollars. Then we can decide what transformation code I want to run. And I can decide on things like how often should this workflow, when should it run, et cetera. So that's great. I have this daily workflow. Well, let's say I'm going and wanting to modify or test some of the code that I want. I'm the developer and I'm trying to say, oh, the business came to me and said, we want you to calculate this X instead of Y. Well, this is what's so cool about Snowflake and Daasity. So if I'm doing that, I don't want to go and write my code and put it into a production system. What I want to do is actually be in a test warehouse. And so what I've done here is I've actually created a test warehouse called Demo Snowflake. It is an exact replica of my production warehouse, and we'll come back to this screen in a sec. And this allows me to go back to my workflow, and I've got this staging order attribution that I created. And I can go on this little test button here, and now I can choose where do I want to run this code. Not only do I get to choose, do I want to run it in production or in my demo environment, but I get to choose what branch. And so it gives me the ability in one place to very easily go and essentially do this software development. Really, it's analytic software development. And you can see I wrote some stuff here yesterday that kind of failed. So I have the ability to go in and it says, yo, I had something wrong around my SQL script. So it's like, great, this is perfect. And then when I'm done, I can deploy that and come back and be able to go and execute this and schedule it. So I can come back and schedule this to run, which I've done here. So I've scheduled it to run every day at midnight. And I can also link these workflows together. So I actually have another series of scripts that actually run based upon the completion of an earlier one. So I can now start to chain these workflows together. So all from extraction through setting up different transformation through the operationalize. And that operationalize is really kind of cool because I go into my targets and I can see that I can do something like here, I'm sending events to Klaviyo. And events, if you're familiar with Klaviyo, allow you to kind of trigger emails. So I could do a whole bunch of analytics. I could set up a whole bunch of sequence of queries that take data from these sources, transform it, create a segment, and push that data back into my marketing platforms to trigger events or audiences or whatever I can, whatever I want. And so that's really the power of Daasity, is the ability in one place to, built on top of Snowflake, and with a very great interface for enabling proper software development by having that test warehouse with one click. So I'll kind of come back and I'll just sort of destroy it, but you can, as it sort of destroys this, it's going to allow me to just easily go in and essentially create with one button, go and create that test warehouse that I can go and really develop my platform on.
This is a incredibly powerful platform that you've built. Tell me more about, how did you choose Snowflake? Because it seems like a great fit for Snowflake. How did you actually choose Snowflake when initially developing this platform?
Yeah, it was as we were early on. We were looking at a couple of different platforms in terms of being able to store and transform the data. So different OLAP, what I like to call sort of OLAP platforms, or sort of standard name. But as we're looking at some of the different platforms, what was really important to us was a couple of things. Is we knew that we had very technical users and we had a lot of users that were non-technical. And so we wanted to build something where we could build an interface and make it very easy for the non-technical user to be able to interact with this. So you don't have to be a DBA or know how to navigate a really complicated UI. And we're able to do that because so much is driven through Snowflake by us being able to just essentially run queries to go create a new database, to upscale a warehouse size, to downscale, to trigger the cloning of a database, right? Things that actually become very simple for us to go and build, and really important that creates a great merchant behavior without having to have super crazy technical people, or potentially also, a big infrastructure around, I've got to go through multiple layers of how do I get access or manage, as I've seen with other providers where I'm an analyst and I can't go get access to data because I don't have that authorization. It's a lot easier within Snowflake.
So that's pretty cool to hear. I mean, and then really, it seems like the simplification of your architecture with Snowflake was a big driving force.
It was. It was huge for us. I don't think we could have launched as I said, we have this growth platform, that smaller kind of pre-packaged, and that powers a lot of brands, and it gives a brand that maybe has an analyst, but not a huge development team, the ability to go and be very analytical. And so what was great about kind of the functionality that Snowflake provided is it made our ability to manage that much easier. So things like every merchant gets their own database. So there is no risk of your data being accessed by anybody other than just you. And so it gets not only into sort of the ability of us to manage that, but also into concerns around things like security, because everything becomes siloed. And if we had to go down another path, either we would have had to have a lot of sort of complications around how do we provision and how do we set up databases, but then there other approaches are, well, I'm going to sort of keep all my data in one stack, and then you get a lot of those risks around security, and we make sure to avoid all that.
And that's pretty interesting, and I think something that really hits home is with that simplification of your architecture, it means your feature velocity is much higher, so you're able to deliver more value to your customers. And like you mentioned already, you're able to build something at lower cost of operations. It's because you have fewer people that can actually deliver and build the thing that you're trying to create.
Exactly, yeah. So it's allowed us to focus more on the things that really matter. So managing the environment isn't what a consumer brand wants to focus on. And it's not necessarily what we want to focus on. We want to focus on how do we drive the analytics? How do we drive that brand to become more analytical and to drive sort of the insights out of that and be able to operationalize that? It's a simplicity, but sort of a very beautiful simplicity in that Snowflake has made managing that ecosystem, that platform very simple for us. And so it's allowed us to kind of focus on things like transformation. How do we build data models? So how do we go and make it easy for a merchant to get the data that they want and the structure that they want, to focus on the extractors and the data sources that we can connect to, and focus our efforts there, and not necessarily in how do we just manage the platform and make sure that you've got your data.
So you mentioned a little bit of this before, like what are some of the key features of Snowflake that has been impactful to you and your product? You mentioned a little bit on the ability to create warehouses and things like that, with just a SQL statement. What are some other big features of Snowflake that has really made an impact?
Yeah, so first we just start from, we have one instance, and as I said, we're powering over 1,600 brands. So there's almost an unlimited number of databases and roles and users, right, that you can create in Snowflake, which is great, which means regardless of your size. So for us, it's great because every single brand gets their own database, they get their own role, they get their own user. So that means everything is compartmentalized, right? And that's important for us as a brand, as a company that's sort of powering other brands to use data. But if you're your own brand wanting to go and sort of build out, it gives you huge functionality in terms of maybe I need to go securitize. Or as a brand that we've actually been working with in the EU, they have regulations around data that people in the UK can see versus data that's in Germany can see. And so that really, we're able to do that in a very easy fashion with Snowflake. So that's one part of it. Then, as I mentioned, kind of the scaling up and down. So one of our largest brands that we work with, they have an incredible amount of data. And so being able to essentially at the start of the workflow, increase to an Excel to load not only their data faster, but some of their data is so large that it needs an Excel warehouse from a memory size. And then it's, well, we don't want that running the entire time. As soon as that process is done, then we can scale it back down. And so we can be very efficient from a processing perspective. So that's kind of the second piece. And then the third one, is this data sharing. So it's great to be able to, we have merchants as well that want to be able to go and ingest a lot of their own data or or be able to kind of execute additional processing. And so they can do that and say, okay, I've got my Daasity instance, I've got data here. I want to go be able to do, maybe some of my own crazy stuff or whatever you want to say, but they're able to kind of link their Snowflake and our Snowflake together and be able to very easily share data across that. Or with vendors, there's a number of vendors that really the way we access the vendor data for the merchant is actually through Snowflake and saying, well, we're going to let you join to that. And so there's so many things in those different components that make Snowflake so important for not only us, but really powering our merchants to customize their experience, not only with Daasity, but with Snowflake.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, the three that you mentioned really, the data governance and the ability to create these databases and the simplicity in that area, to the ability to scale up and scale down the resources, that separation of compute and storage, so important. And I love that you mentioned data sharing, because as a developer, it doesn't. I've met a lot of developers that are unfamiliar with the concept of data sharing, right? There's not a lot of public APIs that are meant to be data sharing. Whereas with Snowflake, it's an integrated element where you don't need an API. You can actually directly query with a data share, with the data there. And so it really simplifies that architecture. So that's really cool to hear. What's next? What should your customers get excited about over the next 6 months to 12 months?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. So one is definitely, we are so focused on helping consumer brands, and that's really core to Daasity's. We've been very sort of vertically focused there. And so one is for us to be able to help brands get more insight into more data sources where they're selling. And so for us, we've done a really good job in sort of the digital space, but there's so much data out there from a non-digital perspective that brands need to get to really understand their entire business. And key components become, how do we get that data from a variety of sources? They're also Snowflake partners as well in terms of bringing that in. Secondarily, we think about a lot about really making our workflow engine even better, and around how do we do things around notifications? How do you make more complex workflows? How do you sort of have great visuals in terms of these workflows to be able to really be the one-stop shop? And then thinking about sort of advanced analytics. So, one of the things that I think is really interesting is we've got this kind of Universal Analytics is going away, Google Analytics 4 is sort of coming on board. It's going to give you a lot more data if you do it correctly, and getting that data into Snowflake and being able to combine it with all of your other infos. We're going to get so much more visibility into what consumers are doing online and in your stores that most brands don't have. And so I'm really excited about what that's going to do for a consumer brand to make them more intelligent.
That is a pretty incredible roadmap that you've put together. I'm excited to see it. And so, Dan, where should people go to learn more about you and Daasity?
Yeah, you can just go to daasity.com or drop me a line. I'm simply dan@daasity.com.
And thanks again for joining me here in the studio today. It's been really great having you.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. It was great being here.
And thanks to everyone watching. To see more interviews like this with tech leaders building applications on Snowflake, check out our other videos on YouTube and be sure to subscribe. My name is Daniel Myers, and this has been another episode of Powered by Snowflake.